Good morning, church. Good morning. What a beautiful day in the Lord. It's great to see everybody here today. Thankful for the songs and the prayers and the people who waited at the table and for you being here and lifting up your voice to God. We're going to take our teaching today from Matthew chapter 25, and as was read in Matthew chapter 24, we have a context that we want to set. So the first thing we're going to do this morning, we're going to set the context for why Jesus was telling these parables. We're going to talk today about the parable of the 10 virgins and the parable of the talents. We're going to go through them and we're going to discuss them in their application of that day. Then we're going to go back and we're going to look at spiritual application for each of these parables and try to see how we can understand them and how they can affect the way we think and affect the way that we live. We begin in chapter 24, verse 1. And Jesus and the disciples, this is the last week that Jesus would be on the earth in a human body. And he is in the temple with his disciples. And it's Passover time. It's the last week. And the disciples are looking at the great temple and the giant stones that made the temple and the magnificence of this building, of this structure, of this edifice. And it says in chapter 24, verse 1, Jesus came out from the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. And he said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down." As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, his disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" So they're asking him some specific questions. What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And the conversation that takes place after that, if you have a red letter edition, it's all red. And he's answering their questions. Okay? So we're going to skip now to the passage that George read at the end of 24, which sets up the parables. And he's talking about when he's coming back. But of that day, in verse 36, "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone." He's talking about his second coming. And then all the way down to the end of chapter 24, he's talking about the second coming and telling them to be ready for the second coming. And then he gives them two parables. And the context of these two parables must be understood in light of the fact that he's talking about his return to the earth and judgment. So let's pick up these two parables here. Chapter 25, verse 1. "Then the kingdom of heaven will be comparable to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom." Jesus saying, the kingdom of heaven, when I come back and prepare people to enter into my spiritual kingdom, this is how I want you to understand my second coming, is what he's saying. And he's going to use an example of something that they would have understood that may be a little foreign to us. When we get married, we have an engagement time. And then there's a wedding ceremony, and then at the wedding ceremony you become husband and wife. In this time, there was a betrothal period which would have taken place before the wedding ceremony. But at the betrothal, they become husband and wife. It's just the marriage is not consummated until later, much later. So you remember that when Mary and Joseph come into Jerusalem, it says that Joseph was betrothed to Mary, and then it calls Joseph her husband, even though they were betrothed. And so the betrothal period usually took place between fathers that were arranging a marriage for their kids, and there would be a bridal price that would be paid, and they would all approve of the marriage, and then the two would be betrothed. And there was about a year of time where the husband would prepare a room for his wife at his father's house. He would prepare a place, he would plant crops, he would plow the fields and show himself ready to be a provider for his new wife. And after about a year of betrothal, then the the father would tell the son, you are now ready to have a wife. You have done all the things that you were supposed to do, so go and get your bride. And then the husband would travel with his companions. We would call them groomsmen. He would travel with his companions to the bride's father's house. There he would meet the 10 virgins in this example, which would have been the bridesmaids, the friends of the bride. And then they would go from there back to the groom's father's house, which would now be her new home. And along the way, the bridesmaids would have these torches, which are depicted up here in the top right, and they would light the path for the bridal party. And they would travel back to the new home of this couple. Then there would be a marriage feast, a wedding feast, which would take about a week. Every night they would party, and they would have about a week of celebration of this union, this husband and wife. And then all the people would leave, and then the new husband and the wife would finally get to consummate their marriage and start their new lives together. Jesus is using this, what they would have completely understood, as an example of his coming back. So he says, the kingdom of heaven will be comparable to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Verse 2, 5 of them were foolish and 5 were prudent, and when or wise. And when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the prudent took oil in flasks along with their lamps. So they would have something that may have looked something like this, where there's a wick there, and they would pour olive oil in the hole to allow it to stay lit, and they would have to keep replenishing the oil. And evidently, in this parable, there were half of the bridesmaids didn't bring extra oil. They thought that they had enough. But the problem is the groom was delayed in coming, so their oil ran out. That's what's going to happen here. So we've got 5 who were unprepared for the waiting time, and 5 who took precautions and had extra oil. So verse 4, but the prudent took oil in flasks along with their lamps. They had not only the oil in their lamp, but they had extra oil for backup. Verse 5, now while the bridegroom was delaying, they all got drowsy and began to sleep. But at midnight there was a shout, behold the bridegroom, come out to meet him. Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. They cut off the charred piece, and they made the wick ready for long time burning. And they trimmed their lamps. And then the verse 8, the foolish said to the prudent, give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out. They weren't ready for this delay of the bridegroom. They only had enough oil in there to get them to midnight. They thought that he would have come earlier and they could have had the procession, but they didn't plan ahead. They were not ready for the groom. So they go to the other ones and say, give us some of your oil. They're like, we only have enough for us. We don't have enough to give to you. So you have to go and buy some. Verse 9, but the prudent answered, no, there will not be enough for us and you too. Go instead to the dealers and buy some for yourselves. Now it's midnight. There's no dealers open. They're going to have to wait until morning and hopefully get some and catch up with everybody. Verse 10, now while they were going away to make the purchase, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding feast, and the door was shut. So they go through the processional, through town, up and down the streets. They go to the house of the new house of the groom and the groom and the bride. And the wise virgins had enough oil for their lamp. They're lighting the procession. The other ones are waiting for somebody to open up their store so they can buy olive oil. Now, they go to the new house. They start the week-long feast. But to start the week-long feast, the first thing the groom does, after everybody gets in there, shut the door. Now, the other virgins aren't there. They're off buying olive oil. Verse 11. Later, the other virgins also came, saying, Lord, Lord, open up for us. But he answered, Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Be on the alert then, for you do not know the day or the hour. We're going to come back to that parable and talk about the spiritual application. We're going to go on to the second parable, the parable of the talents. We could do the next slide for the parable of the talents. For verse 14, for it is just like a man about to go on a journey. Just like a man about to go on a journey. He's talking again about the second coming. He's giving a new way to think about it. He gave the parable of the virgins as one way to think about it. Now he's going to give a different parable, also talking about the second coming. It's like a man about to go on a journey who called his own slaves and entrusted his possessions to them. Some of your versions may have a different word than possessions, but it's his wealth, the stuff that he owns. Verse 15, to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2 talents, to another 1, each according to his ability, and he went on his journey. When we use the word talent in English today, we tend to think about an ability or a gift. That's not what the word talent means in this context. The word talent was a unit of measurement, and it would be a unit of measurement perhaps of gold or of silver. And from my research, 1 talent of gold could equal up to 15 years of a wage during this time. So 15 years wages, 1 talent. So this was a wealthy man, and he's leaving some of his money to each of these 3 servants. Now it says each according to their own ability, meaning some of them were more shrewd and prudent with how to manage and build wealth than the others. And so he gave them what they could handle. He didn't give the man who was not good with money 5 talents, his bulk of his estate, to manage it, because he wouldn't have been able to handle that much money. He gave the least amount of money to the one who could deal with that amount of money, and he gave the most amount of money to the one who had the ability and the shrewdness to deal with it. So it says he gave to each one according to their ability, and then he went on his journey. Immediately, the one who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and gained 5 more talents. So he didn't waste any time. He goes right out and he starts making a return on his investment. Think day trader or something like that. He's buying low and selling high. He's very shrewd with money. He knows how to make money. And there are people in this room probably like that. I'm not like that. I'm the 1 talent. I'm the well, less than that talent man, because if a talent is 15 years' wages, that's a lot of money. But this man went and traded, and he gained an investment, a return on his investment. Verse 17, in the same manner, the one who had received the 2 talents gained 2 more. Verse 18, but he who had received the 1 talent went away, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. So the 5 talent man doubles his money. The 2 talent man doubles his money. Now the 5 talent man ended up with 10. The 2 talent man ended up with 4. But they both did the exact same acceptable work with what they had. The 1 talent man didn't come back with any extra. So, verse 19. Now after a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. That's what this picture is displaying. The master of the house is settling up accounts with his slaves. Verse 20, then the one who had received the 5 talents came up and brought 5 more talents, saying, Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. See, I have gained 5 more talents. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Verse 22. Also the one who had received the 2 talents came up and said, Master, you entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I have gained 2 more talents. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful slaves. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Verse 24. And the one also who had received 1 talent came up and said, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed, and I was afraid. So he sees his master as being a hard man. Now I want you to understand that Jesus doesn't acknowledge that this master was this kind of person. This is this 1 talent man's perception of his master. He says, you reap where you didn't even sow. In other words, you harvest in places that you don't even own, that you didn't put seed out there, but you're harvesting it. You're gathering where you didn't even gather seed. You're a hard man. And I was afraid. What is he afraid of? He's afraid that when the master comes back, he's going to have lost the money. He doesn't want to have lost the money. So what does he do? He says, I went away and I hid your talent in the ground. See, what you have is yours. So he saved it, but he didn't do anything with it. But he still had it. He was given something he didn't do anything with. Verse 26, but his master answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy slave. You knew, in your mind, I think is what he means here, you knew that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have put my money in the bank, and on my arrival I would have received my money back with interest. So you don't know how to day trade, you don't know how to buy low and sell high, you're not a shrewd person with money. You could have at least done the thing that everybody knows what to do. Put your money in the bank and let it accrue interest. You didn't have to do a whole lot of shrewd trading to get that done. You didn't even do that. Verse 28, therefore take away the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. Verse 29, for to everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have shall be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave into outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Jesus calls this servant lazy, wicked, and worthless. That should draw our attention. But let's go back and let's look at these parables from their spiritual applications, from their spiritual meanings. And so we have to ask ourselves, when we look at parables, what do the things in the parable represent? Because parables are physical things that represent spiritual realities. And it's not always that every single thing in the parable represents something specific. Jesus doesn't always intend every single thing to have some meaning. He's usually telling parables to make a point, one general point. And sometimes the things in there have meanings, and sometimes they're just part of the story. For example, he uses the bridesmaids as the example because he can't use the bride as the example because there's more than one of us. So he uses bridesmaids, which represents us, and so forth. So if we go back to the virgins, we think, what are the meanings of the people in the story? Well, the groom is Jesus. Jesus is coming back. The Bible tells us that we are the bride of Christ. The church is the bride of Christ. Jesus is coming back for us. So what is his message to the church? This is what he's getting at. He's talking to you and he's talking to me. So what is he saying? The bridegroom is Jesus. Now, what the lamps represent and what the oil represents, I'm not quite sure that we can know that or if it matters. We could say that the light represents our Christian light and the oil may represent the Holy Spirit. Some people go that way with it. But I think the main thing is to get the main point. And that is, he's telling us to be ready for his arrival. And if we get that, I think we've got it. But let's go through and look at a few things. In verse 6, it says, at midnight there was a shout. Well, doesn't that remind you of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, where it says, the Lord will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel. Jesus is talking about his second coming. In verse 10, they go to the wedding feast. And the Bible says in Revelation 19, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. The wedding feast represents getting into heaven itself. When Jesus comes back, the wedding feast will begin for those who were ready. So those who were ready will get into heaven and have fellowship with Jesus. And he's saying here that the wedding feast is when he comes back are only for the prepared. Now, this door that was shut is significant because he's saying after he comes back and people get into the wedding feast, no one else is getting in. And might I also say, doors shut not only to keep people out, but it's also to keep people in. Because once we get to heaven, we make it to heaven, once we're there, we will never be thrown out. So there should be some comfort in that. But once that door is shut, that door is shut. No one's getting in, no one's getting out. No second chances for anybody that wasn't ready. And there's no way that Jesus is going to throw us out of that wedding feast. But in verse 11, the other virgins come, the unprepared ones. And they say, Lord, Lord, open for us. You know, the other time we see Lord, Lord is in Matthew 7. When Jesus says there's some people that are going to say, Lord, Lord, have we not done many wonderful works in your name and all of this? And he will say, I never knew you. I don't even know who you are. That's what he says to the bridesmaids in verse 12. He says, truly, I say to you, I do not know you. Well, how could he not know them? They were on the guest list. They were bridesmaids. They were on the invitation to the wedding feast. How could he say, I don't know you, when he obviously does know them? And the answer to that is that he doesn't know them because it doesn't mean he doesn't know who they are. He knows who we are, but when we get to the judgment and we are unprepared to meet him, he says, we had no relationship the whole time you were on earth. You didn't talk to me. You didn't come to me. You didn't put your faith in me. I don't even know you. We had no relationship. I don't know you in like that. I know your name. I know where you're from. I know your parents. I know your family. I know everything you did. But we didn't have a relationship. I don't know you. This is the biggest fear we should have when we get to the judgment seat of Christ, is for him to say, I don't know you. And we say, I came to church every Sunday. I came to church every Wednesday. I came to Bible class even. I even participated in the conversations. He says, I don't know you. So Jesus says, verse 13, be on the alert then, for you do not know the day nor the hour. In other words, just because Jesus isn't coming back yet, just because we may live 80, 90, 100 years on this earth, and Jesus doesn't come back, and every day we think, maybe he's not coming back, so we draw further and further away from him. He says, do the opposite. Get closer and closer and closer to me during that time. Well, let's look at the parable of the talents. There's a 5-talent man, a 2-talent man, and 1-talent man, and there's a master, 3 servants. The master is, of course, Jesus, represented in this parable. The 3 servants are, of course, us, members of his family. Now, in verse 14, it says that he entrusted his possessions to the people. He entrusted his possessions to them, and he went away. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are the things that God owns that we've been entrusted with? And so when I meditate on this and I think about this, well, I think it's got to be the souls of people. These are the possessions. Does God care if is my mission here to make money for the Church of Christ? Is that the real mission? Now, we need money to do work, but that's not what he's talking about here. He's using this as an example, but the real mission is to win souls. The real mission is to take care of the souls that we've been entrusted with each other, and to bring more souls. That's what's been entrusted to us. And some of us have 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1 talent worth of ability. And we've all been called to act on whatever the ability is that we have. So what was the fault of the 1-talent man? What did he do wrong? Nothing. What did he do wrong? Nothing. In other words, doing nothing is what he did wrong. He was not working. He was not in the vineyard of the kingdom, as the song we sang. He was not working in the vineyard of the Lord. God is not concerned about growing the treasury. He's concerned about growing souls. And we have been entrusted with growing souls. So when we compare these 2 parables, we look at the parable of the virgins. And if I had to boil it down to 1 point, and you had to boil it down to 1 point, what would we say it was? Be ready. Be ready. The parable of the talents, if I had to boil it down to 1 point, I would say, do something. Do something. So let's go to the next slide. I think of it like this. Jesus is answering questions that his apostles raised. And they said, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And so he starts teaching them these parables. And the first parable is parable of virgins. And he's saying, well, when I come back, the first thing I want you to do is to be ready. But he didn't tell them how to be ready. He didn't, we can try to figure out what the lamp is and all of that. I don't know that I can say for sure what that lamp represents, but I do know the point. The point is to be ready. And then narrowing the focus, he's saying, here's how you can be ready for my return. And then he gives the second parable. You can be ready by being active in the kingdom. You be ready by doing something. You be ready by working. You be ready by not being lazy. And that's how it is with us. We could be coming to church, and we could be engaged in all of that, but if we're not active in doing something for the Lord beyond that, then we are not ready. We are not ready. So let's bring this home. There are 5 foolish virgins, and there's a 1-talent man. Are these people in the world that he's talking about, or are these people in his kingdom that he's talking about? The 5 virgins who were foolish were part of the wedding party, and they were part of the invitation. They were part of the thing. They could have gone into the house. The 1 talent man was the same as the 2 and 5 talent man in relationship to the master. Jesus is telling us, and this is the reality, some people in the church are going to hell. Now we need to grasp that. There are people who are in the true church who are going to hell. That's not a popular message, but that's exactly what he's saying. We need to take heed to that, and we need to look at ourselves and say, I don't want to be that person. So how can I not be that person? Well, we can't be a wicked, lazy servant. We have to be active in the kingdom, and it's so easy to fall into complacency. It's so easy to fall into complacency. But Jesus said the church is his bride. He paid the bridal price by giving his own blood, and now it's our job to work in the kingdom. May I say it this way, just because we've been baptized for the right reason, that doesn't mean we're saved. That does not mean we're saved. That means we were saved when that happened. But you've got a whole life to live. We've got a whole life to live. We can't just say 20 years later, I haven't grown in my faith, but I'm baptized for remission of my sins. 40 years go by. I don't grow in my faith. I don't grow in my relationship with God. I don't grow in sanctification. I don't add on the 2 Peter 1 virtues. I don't do any of the stuff. I'm not getting more and more like Christ at all. I'm just waiting for Jesus to come back. And I say, I was baptized for the remission of my sins. I was a member of the true church. And if I haven't done anything to get closer to Jesus, and if I haven't done anything to bring souls into the kingdom, and I'm entrusted with his possessions, and I'm not doing anything about it, I'm a wicked slave. I'm not going to make it. And we need to take that very seriously. So I'm asking today for us to think about this. These are Jesus' words. This is the warning of our Master. There will be some in Matthew 7 that say unto him, Lord, Lord, let me in. And he's going to say, I don't even know who you are. I pray that's not me. I pray that's not you. So how are you today? Are you working in the kingdom? Are you getting more? And it's not just about working too. It's about being more Christ-like. Are you becoming more and more Christ-like every year of your life? Or have you grown complacent and you can go back and go, you know what? I'm looking back 20 years and I haven't grown a bit. I'm the same man, I'm the same woman I was 20 years ago. I'm no closer to Jesus. I'm no more like Jesus now than I was then. It's time to change that. So if your life is right with God and you're on the right track, God bless you. But if your life is not right and you want to make it right, we're going to offer you prayer this morning and to get your life back on track. So if you have any spiritual need, we invite you to come forward as we stand and as we sing together.